For the people at home that didn't get all this, this is SpongeBob SquarePants, a likable children's character. These are sponges. Now, sponges are so just in review, a sponge is a collection of a bunch of cells living together. These were the first animals to evolve. An animal is an organism that's multicellular, consists of more than one cell, and has to eat. Doesn't make its own food. So these things evolved in the ocean, and as soon as fish and mollusks and things that could eat sponges evolved, the sponge had to either change or die out. So some of them evolved to be calcareous sponges, which are hard on the outside. Some of them evolved to have poison, so that if the fish eat it, the fish would get sick and they wouldn't eat it. So a lot of sponges are poisonous to eat. They don't like sting you, but if you were to eat them, you'd get sick. And some sponges are made of glass, silica. They have silica shells. Silica is a common molecule found in the sands and can be used by the sponge to make like a glass covering that's also hard and difficult to eat. And so that protects the sponge. That's a glass sponge there. And some of the sponges have a real tough fiber. It's called a fibrin that makes them, it's hard to chew, hard to swallow. And that's like the bath sponges that you see nowadays. They have a lot of, it's called spongin. Did I say fibrin? I meant spongin. I have some sponges here I'll pass around. But this material right here is called spongin, and it's a protein fiber that makes it feel like this, kind of soft and squishy. And if this were alive, it would be under the water and it would be surrounded by living cells. But what people do is they'll take these sponges off the ocean floor and they'll let them dry out so all the cells die. Then they wash it off so the cells get washed off, and you're just left with the protein fibers. And this can be used as a sponge to bathe with. This is how all sponges used to be before they started making them out of plastic. And that's what SpongeBob is. He's a plastic one, but they used to have. So upsetting. They used to have just these, and you get them off the bottom of the ocean, and that was cool to find. So
the population go down
the population of sponges when you start hunting them. Yeah. But there's still a lot of them, and they farm them in some areas where they have a protected area, and they just harvest them every once in a while. And so that's one of them that's mostly a fibrous, has a lot of spongin in it. See, you have a whole. They still sell these. Not everywhere uses the plastic sponges. So I'm going to pass these around. There's just come in a bunch of different shapes and such. You can open this and touch them. But don't take them out of this box, okay? Because I want to keep them all together. And, oh, by the way, sponges are phylum Porifera. Porifera is the name of the phylum. So if you remember biology, it goes kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Y'all remember your biological organization? What's above kingdom?
Domain.
Domain. So this is domain eukarya, means it has eukaryotic cells. And so like this you could film up here since I'm writing.
What's the way to
Does that make
remember
sense?
It's like King Philip.
King Philip came over from Germany slowly. K stands for kingdom, and we're kingdom animals now. We're the animal kingdom. The one we studied last week was the plant kingdom. And then the one we were studying earlier was domain bacteria. Remember when we spent a few days on bacteria? So anyway, animals, phylum Porifera. This is the simplest phylum. There's like 18 different phylums of animals, but maybe more than that. But Porifera are The first one's the sponges. Let me pass some sponges around. I'll start these on this side, and I'll start these on this side. Let's talk about the organization of a sponge. Sponges have many cells that you have to know. So let's look at them. So what we're doing is we're taking a little piece of the sponge and we're blowing it up real big so we can see what it's made of. It's got cells on the outside that are pores. They're called porocytes or pore cells that are hollow and let stuff in. Let stuff into the middle of the sponge. So those are porocytes or pore cells. So porifera gets its name from these cells that let the little tiny holes in the walls that let stuff into the middle. And so when you have this sponge, what it looks like is a tube. The sponge looks like a tube that's attached to a rock or something. And it's got a wall on the side. But it's got a big hollow area in the middle. And these little pores are openings, have an opening on each end, so that stuff can go through the pore and get into the middle. So stuff can be pulled in through these pores and into the middle. And there's this big cavity in the middle. You see this open space in the middle. And the wall is kind of thin, and the wall goes all the way around like this. Comes out at you and goes around and goes around. It's a three-dimensional structure. Now, creating a water current, on the inside are these special cells called collar cells or choanocytes. These cells right here have flagella on them. And so lining the center here are special cells that have flagella that line the middle here. And the flagella beat back and forth and create a current that pulls the water in. And these collar cells, we're going to look at them up close here, but they'll eat any food that's brought in with the currents. Sponges are filter feeders. They filter the water of its food. So there you have the collar cells here that move their flagella back and forth. They create a current. The water comes in through the little holes. The water goes out through the top. The top's called the osculum. Can you say osculum?
Osculum.
That's the top there. Water goes in and out the top. Sponges are constantly filtering the water. That's all they do all day. They don't move around. They don't play video games.
So do we have to know the other?
SpongeBob, he might play video games. What's that?
Do we have to know what the spicule and the M
Yeah.
side is?
Let me get to those. Spicules are what makes the skeleton of the sponge. Spicules, they're often little sharp objects. I'll show you. I got a bunch of pictures of spicules. But they make the sponge either hard or soft. Sometimes they're made out of glass, and they make the sponges. They make what's called the glass sponges. Sometimes they're made out of calcium carbonate, and they'll make the sponges hard. It's the spicules that give the sponge its structure. Sometimes the spicules are made out of spongin, which is that material that I'm passing around there that's a little bit softer. So different sponges are made out of different types of spicules. So those spicules are very numerous inside the body of the sponge and give it its structure. Sometimes the spicules contain a poison, and that can poison the fish that try to eat it. And then there's the amoebocyte. That's a cell that can crawl around here inside the wall here. There's cells called amoebocytes that are shaped like amoebas. If you ever studied biology, you might have seen an amoeba under a microscope. And they just kind of crawl around in the walls here, and they bring food to all the other cells. And they take away wastes, and they can help create sperms and eggs. They can multiply. These amoebocytes can multiply and become any other cell. So if that cell dies, if that collar cell, choanocyte dies, an amoebocyte can crawl over there and become a new one.
So they're sort of like stem cells?
They're stem cells. Good job,
Can
Will.
we use those stem cells?
They're stem cells. They can become any type of cell.
I'm saying, can we use those stem cells?
No, but we can use human stem cells.
Which are umbilical.
Yeah. All your cells at one point were stem cells. When you were
So the
real
amoebocyte is a stem
young.
cell.
I'm just a stem cell.
Your collection of stem cells.
I'm a stem cell.
An amoebocyte is it is a stem cell, and it can become any other cell, but it also has functions. It'll deliver food. Like I say, it could make sperms and eggs, but I think the collar cells can also make sperms and eggs. Here's the collar cells up close. You can see why they call them collar cell. This is the cell. That's the nucleus of the cell. And do you see how it has these kind of, this thing, doesn't that look like a turtleneck collar?
Yeah.
A little bit? That's why they call them collar cells. Somebody looked at them under the microscope and it looked like they had a collar on them. And there's a big flagella. There's the thing that,
Flagella.
the tail that whips back and forth
Flagellate.
that creates the current. It moves back and forth and creates a current. It pulls water in through the pores. The water goes out through the top. What's the top part called? 10 points if you and your partners can tell me what the top part's called. See if you're paying attention here. We just said it. Water comes in through the pores and out through the top. Let me make another pour. In through the pores and out through the top. Yes! Blue is correct. Where's my, what did I do with the... Purple correct. Orange correct. Peach correct. White correct. No, there is no white. Green correct. Did white not answer? No answer. It's an osculum. The osculum is at the top.
Is that funny, Carson?
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Oh man, I can't pick it up.
What yellow?
So, if there's food particles floating around in the water, the collar cells will pull them in and eat them. There's a food vacuole formed around some food. And that particle will be digested inside the cell. So that's what that helps these cells stay alive, is by absorbing the food that's pulled in there. Do you remember them plankton nets when we dragged the plankton nets and there's little critters in it? That's what this thing does. It takes that plankton that's floating around and pulls it in and then eats it. That's what it does all day. Now these sponges can reproduce. I don't know if they show this on SpongeBob or not. But some sponges will produce sperm and other sponges will produce eggs. And often a sponge is hermaphroditic. Do you know what hermaphroditic means? Has both male and female parts. So what sponges will do is they'll produce sperm. Some sponges will produce sperm 1 month and produce eggs the next month. They usually won't produce both at the same time because they don't want to fertilize themselves. They want to fertilize another organism so you can...
So they can't asexually reproduce?
Most of them don't. Well, they can. There's two ways. They can bud off a new sponge. That's asexual reproduction. So they can do that. Yeah, they can break into pieces or bud off a new sponge. And that's just making a copy of themselves, a direct copy. But they can also sexually reproduce by making a bunch of sperm cells. The collar cells can produce sperm cells. And the sperm cells are released and they float out the top. And they can float through the ocean. And if they're lucky, they'll swim into another sponge nearby and fertilize an egg that's held in the walls of the sponge. And there's the fertilization process. You can see the sperm fertilizing the egg. You don't want the lights out so you can see a little better?
Please.
Get the mood right for sponge reproduction.
Okay, I like that.
Like that. And then the sperm comes in through one of the pores, fertilizes the egg. There's the fertilization process. Now the egg is going to start multiplying into 2 cells, 4, 8, 16, 32, and it eventually becomes what's called a larva. A larva is a baby sponge. And I don't know if anyone saw a baby sponge when we were looking at the plankton, but these things can float around as plankton. And I know somebody saw a baby starfish. But anyway, these things will be released, and they have little cilia for swimming. Little swimming hairs. And they're released into the body of the sponge, and they'll swim out the top. And they'll swim around and become plankton. And keep multiplying. And eventually they'll find a spot to land and grow into a new sponge. Perhaps far away from their parents. And that sponge will get bigger and bigger as it goes through life. Sponges can live for hundreds of years, they know. They don't know how long exactly they'll live. But some real big ones they know have been there for over 100 years. And got bigger and bigger and bigger and are still alive. That's pretty cool, isn't it? So that's the sexual stages of sponge reproduction. Now, like I said, a sponge can have asexual reproduction, where it just buds off another sponge, and that thing falls off and floats away, and ends up sticking somewhere. That's another way to do it. You don't get the variation if you do asexual reproduction. If you remember your regular biology class, asexual reproduction doesn't produce variation. It produces a clone that's just like the parent. Sexual reproduction produces a lot of variation, and the kid can be completely different than either parent, and thus you can vary your species so that if something bad, so if conditions change and it maybe gets too cold and kills a lot of the organisms, you might have some variation. Some others might have some way of surviving that change. Whereas if everyone's a clone of everyone else, if the conditions kill one thing, they'll kill them all. So organisms like to reproduce sexually if they can. Some organisms, like people, only do sexual reproduction. They need the variation to survive. The ocean is a pretty stable place, though, and so a lot of creatures can get away with a good amount of asexual reproduction in the ocean because it's stable. A little more stable than the land is. Hey, there's a bunch of spicules. Look at all the different kinds. This is as seen under a scanning electron microscope. Aren't those beautiful pictures? Each species has a different shaped spicule. These can't be seen with the naked eye. They're microscopic. And like I say, they can be made of spongin, they can be made of calcium carbonate, they can be made of glass, which is silica. Lots of different types out there.
Isn't glass sort of viscous?
It is.
Very minutely.
Very slightly. It does flow. If you take an old window that's real old, you'll notice that the bottom is wider than the top because the glass flows downward. And if you look through it, it looks a little warped when you're looking through it. Real old windows.
Never knew that.
My dad has a the house he grew up in that was built in 1950 up in North Carolina, and all the windows are like that are you can tell a window that's been broken where they replaced one of the panes, because that pane is nice and all the others are warped. It's pretty cool that it would do that over 50, 70 years. So these are the four major groups of sponges. So when we're talking about these major groups, we have domain, kingdom, Animalia, Phylum Porifera. What do you think these groups are? What's after phylum? Domain, kingdom, phylum, what? Class. So these four groups are the four classes, the four big classes of sponges. The calcareous sponges have calcium carbonate, so they feel like shells if you were to grab one. It would be hard like a shell, like a seashell, because it has calcium carbonate in it. They're the calcareous sponges. Often at the bottom of the ocean, in real deep waters, you find the glass sponges. Hexactinolita is how you pronounce that, but I'm not going to make you know this scientific word, so don't worry about that. I'll just call them glass sponges on the quiz. If there's a quiz tomorrow, which there might be. Glass sponges have spicules made of silica, which is glass. Demo sponges have spicules that are mostly spongin fibers. Some have glass fibers and spongin, but most of them just have spongin. What is spongin? It's that softer stuff. So the spicules can be made of that soft stuff that we've got passed around the class. That one happens to be green. And this last one, homoscleromorpha, they used to think it was these demo sponges because they have spicules like these do, but these have some major differences from those that they really have just recently, just in the last 10 or 15 years, have given these their own group. They all have real tiny spicules. And they all grow, and these sponges grow to real big sizes. These sponges can be huge, like bigger than this room. What? And can spread out over something and form this giant structure.
Right. Yeah.
This big blob of sponge. Hanging out. Homoscleromorpha. You want to see sponge video?
Yes. Yeah.
Heck yeah, you want to see sponge video?
We're going to go back now to Kate and her exploration of the Cayman Wall. Kate's pilot is Gary, and inside was just one material and a cameraman.
The cameraman.
Opening vent at this time.
We're going to vent now?
We're venting now.
That means we're ready to go. Now this wall outside is the Cayman Wall. There's a slope of these submerged mountains. There is actually one mountain that is 5 miles high. So we're talking really Himalayas under the sea. It's getting very blue out there. Definitely got darker. It's also got a little bit colder. You can feel the temperature difference. Relative them down here is they're not dependent on sunlight. away through its system, and it will take out all those nutrients and then just flush out the water it doesn't need. They're amazingly efficient feeders. I don't know whether you can see just below me here, but there's a thing which is about the most appropriately named thing you can imagine. It is called an elephant ear sponge, and look at that. Isn't that just massive? How big do you think it is, Gary?
9 feet tall.
9 feet tall, look at it. It's just extraordinary. Well, we're nearly behind the sponge belt now, continuing our descent, following the marine snow that the sponges haven't managed to grab on its way down. We'll see where it settles next. Where we're headed is for the whole sector.
So that was part of the longer journey that they went on. Sponges. SpongeBob. Hold on, I got another sponge video.
Someone say lunch?
Is that sponge spelled backwards lunch?
I don't know.
It's eggnog.
Oh, you got me there.
Hey, table, Bobby.
Hold on loosely.
So what's doodle bob?
I heard someone say
Doodle Bob.
Don't be packing up, I got more stuff here. Oh, Ziva. Enable all not recommended. After block.
In the survey of the animal kingdom that follows, we will begin with the phylum of sponges. Of all the animal phyla, sponges are considered to be the simplest, primarily because they do not have tissues and so lack nerves and muscles. As a result, sponges follow pretty uncomplicated lives attached to rocks and logs. The scientific name for the sponge phylum is Porifera, which means four bearers. They were given this name because all sponges are perforated with countless tiny pores, and this is why their dried skeletons absorb water so well. Living sponges continually take water in through their pores and then expel it back outside through a much larger opening. During this process, called filter feeding, special cells inside the sponge's body trap tiny organisms that it uses for food.
I got a scary sponge video here.
Sponges are the oldest living animals. The earliest sponges appeared well over 500 million years ago, before animal diversity flourished in the Cambrian period. Sponges were clinging to the seafloor long before animals had eyes or reproduced sexually, and before the earliest predators emerged, radically changing the requirements for survival. Many sponges are now toxic to fish that would otherwise prey on them. Some, however, find them a haven.
Isn't that scary?
It's chilling.
Yeah. That has been quite chilling.
Hold on.
What?